Before we jump in, I want to correct something from part one. I mentioned that ace king has about 30% equity versus pocket queens or kings. That's not accurate. Against queens, it's actually closer to 43%, depending on suitedness. The 30% figure, which is accurately between 31.2% and 33.4%, depending on suitedness, only applies against pocket kings. The core point still stands, but accuracy matters, and I wanted to set that straight before we dive into part two. In part one of the series, we called ace king the most misunderstood hand in poker, and it didn't take long for the comments to prove the point, with comments like, ace king is only good if you're last to act. I treat it like pocket nines. It's only strong if you're a skilled player. Some of these takes have a little truth behind them, but most reveal the same core issue. A lot of players don't understand what ace king actually is. This isn't a made hand. It's not aces. It's not kings. It's a tool, one with massive potential, but also sharp edges. In this follow-up, we're going deeper. No fluff. No recycled advice. Just the real strategy behind playing ace king profitably. The math, the mindset, the mistakes, and why it performs so differently in the wild than it does on paper. One more thing before we get into it, let me make something perfectly clear. The purpose of this video is to present the data, the math, the player tendencies, the role of position, stack depth, board texture, game flow, and yes, sometimes even the psychology behind decision making. But what we're not going to do is attempt to tell anyone how to play any hand in any given situation. That's not what we do here, and here's why. 1. Poker is situational. Unless you're in the hand, with the players, at that moment, you don't know the full context. We can model spots, sure, but there's no universal script. 2. Poker isn't chess. There are recommended plays, but no guaranteed best move. Tells, misreads, net game adjustments. They all shift the meaning of a hand. 3. Real games don't follow the script. A lot of how-to content out there assumes players act predictably. Fold, raise, call, like it's a simulator. But that's not how it works in the field. Where I play, over half the players don't know pot odds. They don't know fold equity. Some don't even want to know. They act on instinct, ego, fear, whatever's fueling them that hand. So no, we're not giving you a flowchart. We're giving you tools. Information, math, strategy. If you're looking for someone to tell you exactly how to play ace king in every spot, you're in the wrong place. Because anyone giving fixed advice without knowing the context, stack sizes, position, table dynamics, isn't discussing poker. They're selling nonsense. But if you want to understand the hand, its leverage, its strengths, its traps, and use that understanding to make the best decision in the moment, then you're exactly where you should be. Let's take a look at some of the comments we got after part one. Now, before we go any further, this isn't about shaming anyone. These are smart questions and common ideas. For instance, I treat ace king like pocket nines. It's about the same to me pre-flop. This one comes up a lot, comparing ace king to pocket nines or similar hands as if they're roughly equivalent pre-flop. And I understand why. Both hands can miss the flop. Both can end up in coin flip situations. But let's break this down with some real clarity. First off, pocket nines are a made hand. You already have one pair pre-flop, which means you start with showdown value, even if the board doesn't help you. But that hand is fragile. Statistically, there's about a 79% chance that at least one over card will appear on the flop. And if you go all the way to the river, the odds of seeing at least one over card rise to around 93%. So while it's made, it's constantly under pressure. Ace king, on the other hand, is not a made hand. It's two high cards with no immediate value. Its strength comes from other sources, namely fold equity, blocker power, and its ability to apply pressure when the conditions are right. You can use ace king to push out weaker ace x or king x holdings, and yes, it reduces the probability your opponents are holding pocket aces or kings, though it doesn't eliminate that risk. It's a tool of positional leverage, not raw hand strength. But here's the critical piece most people miss. That leverage is entirely situational. If you're at a table where nobody folds, where 5 or 6 players are seeing the flop no matter what, you stripped ace king of its best asset. You're left with 2 unpaired cards that miss the flop 2/3 of the time, and you're in a bloated pot with no fold equity and no post-flop clarity. Now some people will say, well then just raise more. But that doesn't solve the problem, it makes it worse. Sure, you can go from 5 times to 7 times or even 8 times the big blind, but if they're still calling, now you've created a big pot with a hand that's even less likely to win. Your required win percentage goes up, your equity likely goes down, and you're building pots against tighter ranges with limited fold equity. And that brings us to the real question. If your raise isn't doing anything, if it's not thinning the field, gathering information, or taking control of the hand, then why are you raising? You're not raising because it's profitable. You're raising because you've been conditioned to. And in games like that, where aggression isn't respected, ace-king isn't a weapon. It's just expensive. And look, I already know what someone's typing right now. Most players will fold to a 5 times raise, especially with ace-king. Maybe they do where you play, but I don't know where that is. But at the various cards rooms where I play, a 1-3 game rarely sees a flop for less than 4 to 5 times the big blind. You raise 5 times and still go 5 or 6 ways to the flop. And in those games, it's generally not a good idea to be playing ace-king like it's aces. That's one of the reasons I love playing tight aggressive poker in those rooms. Most players are loose passive and loose aggressive. Half of them don't know pot odds, equity, or fold probability, and a lot of them don't care. They're calling with anything, for any reason. And in those games, ace-king isn't a weapon. It's not leverage. It's just an expensive hand that can get you into real trouble if you treat it like it's supposed to work in theory when the table isn't playing by those rules. Another comment that came up numerous times was that position matters. I absolutely agree, but let's not act like that's unique to ace-king. It's better to be in position with any hand. That said, the idea that ace-king is only good if you're last to act, that's a stretch. The real story here is about relative position, not just table position. Because once the flop hits and the action starts, where you land in the betting order can flip completely. If the players to your left fold and the action closes on your right, suddenly you've got effective position, even if you opened from early. But if the players to your right fold and the action flows toward a tricky player behind you, well, you're trapped out of position, even with a premium hand. That can make ace-king harder to play not because it's weak, but because information is limited. So yes, ace-king benefits from position, but so does every hand. The real key is understanding how your position interacts with the board, the stack sizes, and the players still in the hand. There were various versions of this comment. Ace-king is maybe best looked at as a hand that requires a very skilled player to do well with it overall. This sounds like a deep insight, but in reality, it's just a rhetorical statement that applies to every single hand in the game. Any hand, pocket nines, jack-10 suited, even pocket aces, can cost you money if played poorly. So saying that ace-king requires skill doesn't really say much. If we assume skill means understanding poker math, reading board texture, recognizing betting patterns, knowing opponent tendencies, and adjusting to game dynamics, then yes, that's true. Of course, it requires skill, as does everything in poker. Ace-king isn't hard to play because it's complex. It's hard to play because most people want it to be something it's not. It's not a made hand. It has almost no showdown value when it misses. It's a drawing hand with strong equity, not a pair, not a trap, and not magic. Another popular comment, and the last one we'll discuss, was ace-king is also better as a tournament hand as the last aggressor. Let's unpack this slowly because there's a lot buried in one sentence. First, the idea that ace-king is better as a tournament hand is vague. Better how? Better as a shove? Because shorter stacks increase fold equity? Maybe. But ace-king is ace-king. Its strength lies in high card value, blockers, and pre-flop equity against dominated hands. That's true in both cash games and tournaments. Now, the last aggressor part. Let's break that down. Yes, being the last aggressor can give you initiative, and in theory, that lets you apply pressure post-flop. But saying ace-king is better just because you had the last raise is oversimplifying the situation. Let's say you raise pre-flop with ace-king and get 4 callers. You're technically the last aggressor, but what did that really buy you? Post-flop, most players check to the raiser, regardless of what they hit. Now you're first to act with 0 new information on a board you probably missed. You don't have control, you have a trap disguised as position. Don't get me wrong, I would much rather be in last position than first, but in fairness, there may be some advantage to being in early position as well. That's where the early aggressor advantage can come into play. When you're first to act post-flop, Yes, even out of position, you can sometimes dictate the pace of the hand. If you whiff the flop, but think everyone else did too, and want to keep the pot manageable, you can make a modest bet and potentially avoid a larger sizing from another player or take the pot down right there. That's pot control. You're not just betting blindly, you're controlling the decision tree. And that's the deeper point. One of my main goals in poker is to make my own decisions as simple as possible while making everyone else's as difficult as possible. When you're the last aggressor in a multi-way pot, you often do the opposite. You put yourself in murky, bloated pots where your initiative doesn't value clarity, and now your post-flop options are all messy, especially with a hand that missed. Being the last to raise only works when your raise accomplishes something. It thins the field, gains info, isolates a player. But in many $1, $3 games, that's a pipe dream because they call everything. These players don't fold to 5x raises. They call with anything suited, connected, or face card adjacent. You're not the aggressor. You're just the one stuck out front. What's the solution? Raise more? Should you go 7 times, 8 times the big blind preflop? If you do, now you're upside down in the math. Now you need to win more often than your equity justifies just to break even. You've bloated the pot with a hand that, if it misses, leaves you with no pair, no draw, and no control. Bottom line, yes, initiative and late position are valuable, but they're not magic wands. They don't guarantee control, and they definitely don't make ace-king suddenly foolproof. Poker isn't chess. There is no always raise here move. The value of any action depends on the players, the stack sizes, the table, the moment. If your raise isn't accomplishing anything, maybe it's time to stop asking, how do I play ace-king? And start asking, what's this raise actually doing for me? Because when the answer is nothing, you already have your answer. Stop raising. Let's talk raw numbers. People often feel like ace-king is powerful, but what do the hard stats actually say? Heads up, ace-king versus random hand. Ace-king suited has about 66.2% equity, and ace-king offsuit is around 65.3% equity. That's less than a 1% difference. Suited matters, but not nearly as much as people think. You're not golden just because both cards are spades. You're slightly better. Against a made hand, say pocket queens, ace-king suited is about 45.9% equity, and ace-king offsuit is about 43.2% equity. So no, this is not a coin flip. Against a real hand like pocket queens, you are behind. And that's before you even see the flop. It only gets more complex from there. Dominating weaker aces like ace-queen suited. Ace-king suited has about 73% equity, and if you have ace-king offsuit, that drops only slightly to about 72%. Now you're in the driver's seat. But notice, even when dominating, you're not at 90%. There's always risk, always variance. How about suited connectors, like the 7 of spades, 6 of spades? These types hands give ace-king suited about 62% equity, and ace-king offsuit is about 61% equity. These equities assume no one folds and we go to showdown every time. Yes, ace-king suited has a consistent edge over ace-king offsuit, but the difference is small, usually 1 to 2%. So, when players overstate the power of suitedness, ask yourself this: would I play the offsuit version differently? If the answer is yes, ask why. It's sometimes not the difference between profit and disaster. It can be the difference between being barely behind and barely ahead in a long race. Takeaways. Ace-king is a strong starting hand, but it's not a made hand. Suited adds only 1 to 2% to your equity. Don't overvalue it. You dominate weaker aces, but that only matters if they call and if you don't get outdrawn. In bloated multi-way pots, equity drops and variability explodes. It's not about loving or hating ace-king. It's about understanding what it really is, a powerful drawing hand. Nothing more, nothing less. Ace-king's raw strength preflop can give players a false sense of post-flop confidence. While it's undeniably powerful in a heads-up or even 3-way pot, that power deteriorates rapidly in multi-way scenarios, and players often get themselves into trouble when they don't adjust accordingly. Let's break it down. Top pair, top kicker isn't invincible. If you flop top pair with ace-king, say the board comes the ace of spades, 8 of diamonds, and the 3 of clubs, and you're heads up, you're likely ahead. Even in a 3-way pot, you are probably still ahead. But context is everything. If the board is draw heavy, how you size your bet, your relative position, player tendencies, etc., will make the difference. Are your opponents loose? If so, your value slightly diminishes, especially if they'll call with gush shots, bottom pair, or worse. If you are out of position, then your post-flop decisions may have become more difficult. Continuation betting is often discussed as an auto move with ace-king, but that's a massive oversimplification. If the flop goes multi-way, for or more players, your continuation bet loses much of its fold equity. Add in a coordinated board like Jack of Diamonds, 10 of Spades, and the 8 of Spades, and now you're c-betting into potential made straights or straight draws, massive combo draws, potential middle pairs with redraws. And what happens if you check? Someone behind you may fire, representing strength or exploiting your hesitation. As always, it's situational. Opponent tendencies, stack sizes, position, pre-flop action, etc. all must be considered. What if everyone checked? That doesn't necessarily mean they're weak. It's standard poker behavior for players to check to the pre-flop raiser. Don't confuse that for surrender. Just because 4 players check to you doesn't mean they've all missed. They're often just waiting to see what you do. This is where ace-king can become a trap. You bet. One player calls, another raises, and now you're holding top pair with a foggy read, forced into tough decisions against uncertain ranges. Post-flop position isn't always as clear as you think. You may have had position pre-flop, but after the flop action unfolds, your relative position can shift. If players in front of you fold and players behind you act after you, you've lost your advantage. So, being the last aggressor, pre-flop doesn't guarantee clarity after the flop. One advantage of being the early aggressor is pot control. A correctly sized bet can control the pot size. What does correctly sized mean? Well, that's situational as well, dependent upon stack sizes, player tendencies, board texture, position, current pot size, etc. That said, an early aggressor bet can limit exposure, define ranges, and potentially avoid facing a massive bet from another player. But bet sizing is an art. Too small and it looks fishy, too large and you bloat the pot with a hand that has limited showdown value when unimproved. When in doubt, ask yourself questions like, do I have position? How many players saw the flop? What are these players' tendencies? Are they loose, tight, aggressive, passive? What's the texture? What's my plan if I get raised? Depending on your answers, you can then decide if a bet or a check is the best decision. Let's talk about blockers and what they really mean in full ring cash games. The idea of a blocker is simple. A card in your hand that slightly reduces the chance someone else holds that same card, or that it shows up on the board. Hold an ace? Then there are only 3 left. That's meaningful, in theory, but in live, 9-handed games, the impact is often vastly overstated. Let's say you're in a full ring, 9-handed cash game, and you're holding ace-king. How often does at least one other player also have an ace? About 69% of the time. And those other players could hold ace-8, ace-3, suited, not suited. But one thing is almost certain, they're not folding, not pre-flop anyway. Most players will call a pre-flop raise with ace anything, suited, not suited, doesn't matter. Your ace might block a little, but it doesn't do the work players often think it does. Where blockers do matter, board texture. Let's flip the math. Say you hold an ace and no one else does, then there is a 17.3% chance that an ace lands on the flop. Now, say you and one other player each hold an ace, which is more than half the time than the probability of an ace on the flop drops to 11.8%. Blockers have more predictive power on board texture than they do over your opponent's hole cards, especially in multi-way pots. Don't rely on blockers alone to dictate pre-flop aggression. Use blockers in conjunction with stack sizes, player tendencies, board texture, and game flow. Recognize that in live full-ring poker, especially at low stakes, people don't fold suited aces and rarely any ace. How often have you heard, at showdown, well, I have kicker problems as they turn over ace-3? Key takeaways. 1. Blockers are real, but rarely decisive in full ring, low stakes games. 2. If you are dealt an ace, so is someone else 69% of the time. 3. The real strength of blockers is in shaping board texture, not magically preventing someone else from having the card. 4. Multi-way pots kill blocker power. More players equals more range overlap equals less relevance. 5. Don't confuse blockers with fold equity. If people don't fold, it may not matter what you block. Bottom line, blockers are tools, not shields. Use them carefully and always in context. You've now seen the real story behind Ace King. Not just the hand, but the math, the misconceptions, the game dynamics, and the way blocker theory can mislead more than it helps. We've discussed that blockers aren't magic, that Ace King isn't a made hand, and that in multi-way pots, your leverage is only as strong as the table's willingness to fold. You've got the numbers. You've seen the logic. Thanks for watching. If you think our content is of value, please like, subscribe, and share. This is Terry Wood from PokerRailbird.com, and we'll see you at the tables.